President and I will not tolerate attack on U.S. forces.
Tensions in the Middle East spike after the U.S. says an Iran-backed group killed American service members in Jordan.
Call for a ceasefire.
Protesters around the U.S. call for the war in Gaza to end.
Cleveland City Council can, should, and must pass a resolution calling for a ceasefire.
And the mayor of Dearborn, Michigan, echoes those concerns.
We understand that the stance that we've taken, one where we're demanding a ceasefire, is not one that's only relevant and important to Arab Americans and Muslim Americans. Frankly, this is the majority feeling for most of Americans across this country.
This is PBS News Weekly. I'm Nick Schifrin. Tensions ratcheted up this week after 3 American service members in Jordan were killed by an Iran-backed militia on Sunday, according to the White House. It's in a remote desert corner at the intersection of 3 countries, and the attack on Tower 22 led to a U.S. vow of revenge.
The President and I will not tolerate attack on U.S. forces, and we will take all necessary actions to defend the U.S. and our troops.
We will respond decisively to any aggression, and we will hold responsible the people who attacked our troops.
U.S. military and defense officials say an Iranian-backed militia fired a single explosive drone that landed in soldiers' barracks and got through the base's air defense because it was misidentified as a U.S. drone. The 3 soldiers killed were U.S. Army Reservist Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, and Specialist Brianna Moffett. Bases in Iraq and Syria have been targeted repeatedly since mid-October, but this weekend's was the first in Jordan. Tower 22 is located on the Jordan side of a remote demilitarized zone where Jordan, Iraq, and Syria meet. To the north is the U.S. Al-Tanf garrison in Syria. It relies on Tower 22 for logistics and other support. For years, Al-Tanf has functioned as a launching point for special forces combating ISIS militants and monitors a weapons shipping route along a highway leading into Baghdad. The base has been the target of previous strikes by Iranian-backed militias. It's also right next to the vast Rukban refugee camp. At its peak, more than 100,000 internally displaced Syrians were crowded there, seeking refuge from ISIS, but blocked by Jordan from crossing the border. National Security spokesman John Kirby said the U.S. will respond in a way that does not escalate, but acknowledges Iran's role.
We'll do that on our schedule, in our time, and we'll do it in the manner of the president's choosing as commander-in-chief. We'll also do it fully cognizant of the fact that these groups, backed by Tehran, have just taken the lives of American troops.
Iran's foreign ministry said militia groups act on their own.
The Islamic Republic of Iran does not interfere in the decisions of the resistance groups on how to support the Palestinian nation or defend themselves and their people against any aggression and occupation.
From Israel to Iran, the Middle East is on edge, waiting to see how the U.S. responds. At an event commemorating the Gaza war, Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps commander said he didn't want another war, but wasn't afraid of one.
You know that we do not leave any threats unanswered. While we are not looking for war, we do not run away from it.
Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps has long supported what Iran calls an axis of resistance to conduct forward defense against its enemies. In Iraq, that includes Kataib Hezbollah, a member of the umbrella group Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which the U.S. blamed for the attack on the Tower 22 base in Jordan last weekend that killed 3 U.S. reserve soldiers. But yesterday, Kataib Hezbollah claimed in a statement that Iran, quote, does not know how it fights and in fact opposes some of the group's attacks. And Kataib Hezbollah pledged to, quote, suspend military action against the U.S. to, quote, avoid putting the Iraqi government in an embarrassing position.
You can't take what a group like Kataib Hezbollah says at face value.
National Security Council spokesman John Kirby dismissed the group's self-declared ceasefire and said the U.S. would have multiple responses.
What we're anticipating here, which won't just be a one-off. As I said, the first thing you see will not be the last thing.
Iran also supports the Houthis in Yemen, which have launched more than 36 attacks on international shipping and openly trains for attacks on Israeli and U.S. forces. It claims to be fighting for Gazans, but many of the ships it has attacked have no connection to Israel. The U.S. launched its 10th airstrike on a Houthi target in Yemen, and the Houthi spokesman said the group's attacks would continue.
The Yemeni armed forces confirm they are taking all military procedures within the right to defend Dear Yemen and in solidarity with the Palestinian people.
For two perspectives on what happens next, I spoke with Vali Nasser, an advisor at the State Department during the Obama administration, and Reuel Marc Gerecht, a former CIA operations officer who worked in the Middle East in the 80s and 90s. Reuel Marc Gerecht, let me start here with you. How do you believe the United States should respond to the killing of the 3 U.S. soldiers in Jordan last weekend?
I think the United States should take this directly to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps inside Iran or along the coast. We should have an updated version of Operation Praying Mantis in 1988, where the U.S. Navy quickly destroyed the Islamic Republic's Navy. Mutatis mutandis, something like that. I think anything short of that is likely to be unsuccessful, and you're going to see Iran continue its proxy war strategy against us.
Vali Nasser, how do you think the U.S. should respond to this attack that killed 3 U.S. soldiers in Jordan?
I mean, the United States has stated that it does not want to wage a war. If it does not want to wage a war, attacking Iran directly is not the way to go. First of all, even though Kataib Hezbollah is backed by Iran, there's not evidence that Iran ordered the attack that killed the 3 Americans. That's number one. Secondly, a direct attack on Iran is going to lead to a retaliation. We saw this when the United States killed an Iranian general, Soleimani, during the Trump administration. Iran reacted with a barrage of missiles that hit American targets inside Iraq. And had an American been killed then we would have been at war. So it really goes down to what the United States wants to achieve from this attack. Does it want to retaliate? Does it want to deter? Or does it want to expand the war?
Reuel Marc Gerecht, take on those 2 points. That would escalate, what you suggested would escalate this war, and there is no evidence that Iran actually ordered this attack.
Well, one, I think you absolutely want to escalate. I mean, historically, the Islamic Republic has feared escalation. They had, under no circumstances, want to get in a duel with the United States. They know they'll lose. I would say Donald Trump's serious mistake was after the droning Qasem Soleimani. And by the way, the leader of the Kataib Hezbollah at that time, Mohandes, was with Soleimani and also died. It's a creature of the Islamic Republic. He didn't escalate. He should have responded. So the administration has to make up its mind whether it wants to be effective or it wants to retrench. If they do not take this directly to the Islamic Republic, the odds of this being successful, I think, are very poor.
Vali Nasser, what about that? If the U.S. wants to actually stop the attacks, Reuel Marc Gerecht's point is that the strikes need to be inside Iran itself.
No, I mean, if the United States really wants the current spate of conflict to end, it has to end the Gaza war. The only time that all of these attacks ended was when there was an 8-day ceasefire that was brokered at that time by the United States. The underlying cause of the current escalation is the war. And the idea that if you hit Iranians hard or you hit Hezbollah hard, somehow they will back away and let basically the current war in Gaza go as planned could be a massive miscalculation. I mean, these countries have their own interest in this war, both opportunities and fears. And yes, they don't want a larger war, but they're not going to step back just because the United States is hitting them in order for the Gaza war to be conducted as is desired by Israel. And if we miscalculate, thinking that the Iranians will slink into their hole and don't respond, we may be surprised. I don't think the evidence shows that in the past that when we've hit them hard, they have backed away. That is a convenient reading to say that. As I said, when we killed General Soleimani, it did not actually end up with a de-escalation immediately. Iranians hit back. It was President Trump at that point who decided not to retaliate against a very provocative retaliation by Iran.
Vali Nasser, Reuel Marc Gerecht, thank you very much to you both.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
On Israel, President Biden took an unprecedented step by signing an executive order sanctioning Israeli settlers who have attacked Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. Meanwhile, protesters in the U.S. calling for a ceasefire in Gaza have now taken their fights from the streets to city halls across the country.
With the Israeli counteroffensive to the October 7th Hamas terror attack, the plight of Palestinians in Gaza and in the occupied West Bank has taken on new urgency to activists like Shireen Nasser, a Cleveland resident with strong ties to Palestine.
Yeah, might be like the little ones. Yeah. We are struggling every day. I wake up every morning and think of my dad, who is currently in the West Bank, and call him and be like, hey, just want to check on you, make sure you're still alive. We're watching, these horrific stories unfolding of our families back home.
She's channeled her grief into protest, and lately those protests have found their way to an unlikely venue, Cleveland City Hall.
If you see my humanity, that may be the genocide of people that look like me, the family members of 25,000 Palestinians in the greater Cleveland area will be worthy of this city's empathy.
Since October, the Cleveland City Council's weekly public comment period, usually a forum to vent about local issues, has been dominated by talk of a war on the other side of the world, says Council President Blaine Griffin.
I would say approximately 9 out of 10 commenters almost every week for the last 4 to 6 weeks have been people that speak on that conflict.
These citizens are almost all calling for the same thing.
Cleveland City Council can, should, and must pass a resolution calling for a ceasefire.
Join with other brave leaders in calls for a ceasefire.
Call for a ceasefire.
Over a dozen city councils in cities across the country have passed ceasefire resolutions, which range from condemnation of both sides of the war to calling for an end to U.S. military aid to Israel. Daniel Hopkins, a political scientist at the University of Pennsylvania, says it's all part of a growing trend.
We're seeing what political scientists term the nationalization of American politics. So increasingly, city council members, school board members, and other local officials whose training and whose experience is very much focused on their local communities, being forced oftentimes to weigh in on hot-button national issues on which they don't have a lot of experience.
The topic is ceasefire in Gaza.
I can't speak for all of my colleagues, but most of us never signed up to be Henry Kissinger.
Griffin says the protests are interfering with other city priorities.
Just keep reading first reading of emergency resolutions. Just keep moving.
I have a bank that is possibly going to be leaving the community. There's community members that want to come down and petition the government for that. There's people that want to talk about very critical issues. And I think the unfortunate part is that people have been drowned out and don't feel welcome in City Hall.
One of those who hasn't felt welcomed lately is Mark Ashid of the Jewish Federation of Cleveland. Watch as he speaks, 2 rows of activists walk out.
220 woke up not knowing that they would be kidnapped, snatched from their homes, and held hostage in Gaza by terrorists.
The feeling of hostility in that room was very palpable.
For 16 days. There's no equivalence. There's no justification.
1 second.
We're seeing the language turn to anti-Jewish language, not just language about the state of Israel or Israelis.
Because of the tenor of the crowd, Ashid says he no longer encourages his community to attend Cleveland City Council meetings. But his organization wrote a letter to the council against the ceasefire resolution.
We all want to see a ceasefire, but we want to see a ceasefire that leads to peace. And any ceasefire that does not release the hostages and does not remove Hamas from power will only bring us back to this point in the future.
Ashid's opinion aligns with the Biden administration's policy.
The murder of 23,000 Palestinians still hasn't illuminated.
Okay, so you refuse
so-called
to speak
leaders,
to the...
Powerless to change that, activists calling for Israel to stop its bombing campaign have interrupted city council meetings in cities across the country.
You are now disrupting this meeting. So
Okay, you are disrupting the meeting. You're ordered removed from this meeting.
In some cases, like at this meeting in Oakland, California, spreading misinformation and baseless conspiracies.
Israel murdered their own people on October 7th.
Dean Preston, a San Francisco city supervisor, says what he's seen at City Hall has been orderly.
We had thousands of people coming to City Hall. I've been in office 4 years, never seen anything like it in terms of the number of people coming in. These were entirely peaceful gatherings. These folks are coming to their local legislative bodies. They can't go meet with Joe Biden. They can't get 2 minutes in front of the Congress. They can come to their local city council, and that's why they're doing it.
Preston introduced a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of Israeli hostages that passed. But San Francisco's Democratic Mayor, London Breed, returned the resolution without a signature and issued a harsh statement, saying it made the city angrier, more divided, and less safe. Supervisor Preston, also a Democrat and the son of a Holocaust survivor, says the war is directly impacting San Franciscans.
Just this morning, I heard from a Palestinian American friend here in San Francisco who informed me, and I quote, "7 more members of my family have been killed overnight."
This is not just something happening thousands of miles away. And frankly, when elected officials don't speak to this trauma, folks feel ignored and that their pain is not being recognized.
But the resolutions have no legal authority.
It's not the case that any of our allies look to San Francisco or Cleveland to learn what U.S. foreign policy is going to be. But I do think that they potentially can have an impact, say, within the Democratic Party, in that they can signal the extent of discontent and the sources of discontent around U.S. foreign policy set by the Biden administration.
Whether or not President Biden or even the Cleveland City Council responds, Shireen Nazar has no plans to stop speaking out.
Going through this grief, I felt such an urgency to be in my community and do this work alongside my community, calling for a ceasefire, because I think about the kind of world I want to leave for my kids. And so we're going to keep showing up. We're going until City Council says we are engaging back with you.
Khalid wants to talk about the ceasefire.
An impasse with no clear end in America's city halls and in the Middle East. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Stephanie Tsai.
Dearborn, Michigan is home to one of the largest Muslim and Arab American populations in the U.S. Many residents have a personal connection to Gaza or the West Bank. The city's mayor is one of several Arab American leaders who recently declined to meet with President Biden's campaign staff. He joined the NewsHour to explain why.
Mayor Hammoud, thanks so much for joining the NewsHour. Biden's campaign manager visited Michigan recently and met with leaders of various constituencies across the state. Why did you choose to decline that invitation?
We chose to decline because I don't think this is a moment that calls for electoral politics. You know, Palestinian lives should not be measured in polls. For us, this is a moment for our concerns to be heard, listened to, and for us to draft a new course together in terms of changing the direction of what's happening overseas. Those are conversations that need to be had with senior policy staff, with cabinet members, not with campaign staff. When you send campaign staff as the first delegation to this community to meet with us for the first time, that sends a message that this is purely a political problem that you see.
Has the president's campaign reached out to you about this upcoming visit, and would you meet with him if they did?
At this point in time, I have not heard from any individual from Biden's administration. From my perspective, I'm one who firmly believes that community engagement can be powerful when you come together to talk about policies that can save lives. And so if the president or members of his administration, not his campaign, want to meet to talk about charting a new course together, to fundamentally change the direction that they're currently on, to call for a ceasefire, to end the slaughter of innocent men, women, and children, that is a conversation that we're willing to have.
Mayor, there's no indication from the White House or from the president that he is going to change his position on Gaza and on Israel. So barring a call for a ceasefire, do you think that you and the voters that you represent can support him come November?
From our perspective, we don't like to categorize this issue strictly as it pertains to the upcoming elections because it dehumanizes us. It lets us know again that all that matters are polls and outcomes. For us, more than anything, we understand that the stance that we've taken, one where we're demanding a ceasefire, is not one that's only relevant and important to Arab Americans and Muslim Americans. Frankly, this is the majority feeling for most of Americans across this country. Over 60% support a ceasefire. Over 80% of Democrats support a ceasefire. So we think this is the right path forward for any and all individuals seeking the highest office in the world.
Mayor, I understand that you say this is about more than elections, but I do want to ask you about Donald Trump, who appears headed for the GOP nomination for president, and he's made his stance on the war abundantly clear.
When I'm back in the Oval Office, we will cut off every penny of money that we send to the Palestinians and the terrorists on day one.
So faced with the choice of President Biden or former President Donald Trump, based on policies like what you just heard, who do you believe would best represent your constituents?
We have survived the Trump presidency 4 years ago, and I'm not blind to what is being said by Trump and other Republican candidates at the podium. But as it pertains to the decisions that are being made overseas, it seems like there's no real difference between former President Trump and current President Biden. For us, I have a value statement. I believe that no innocent man, woman, or child should be killed. And I'm looking for the president that does not believe that that statement has a qualifier. I think that's a universal value that we should all adopt.
Mayor, respectfully, I know you said that you think there's no real difference, but the former President Trump has also floated religious tests for immigrants, has also said that he would reject Gazan refugees, something that the current president hasn't said. So what do you make of those policies that Trump says he would enact if he wins?
You know, I said there was no difference as it pertains to some of the decision-making that's happening right now in Gaza. From my perspective, you know, Trump is not a candidate that I back. The question that you're asking me is actually a question that needs to be put back into the laps of the president. He is the candidate that is seeking the highest office in the world. And so the question has to be put to him. What will he do to earn the trust and the respect of the constituency that he's trying to represent in that White House? That is a question that falls on the laps of the candidate. As somebody's run for office, I don't look at the voters and say, you're at fault if I'm not elected to the office. As a candidate, I look in the mirror, I listen to the concerns of the majority of Americans in this nation at this point in time, 50% of which, by the way, also believe that what is unfolding is a genocide. And so that question is to be put to him as a candidate. How will you change course to listen and heed the concerns of your American voters today?
Mayor Abdullah Hammoud of Dearborn, Michigan, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
This week, Hamas said it will consider a three-phase hostage for ceasefire deal. The first phase would pause the war for 6 weeks and release 30 to 35 older women and children taken hostage during the October 7th attacks. I spoke with Qatari Foreign Affairs Ministry spokesman Majid bin Mohammed Al Ansari this week about what this path forward could look like.
I can tell you that we are at a good moment now. It's been we're at a point where a lot of things that have eluded us for a couple of months now, we are seeing, a draft being circulated. As you saw today, Hamas announcing that they have received the draft and are discussing it, and that is a point that we were very far from a couple of weeks back. Now we have a general understanding of what the next phase of the pause will be and how that will play out. And I would say that this is very significant because as long as the process is ongoing like this, as long as we're having ideas going back and forth, we can be sure that at least there is a light at the end of the tunnel where we can get to a sustainable pause at the end.
As you said, Ismail Haniyeh today said he was going to review the draft, and he's flying to Cairo, presumably to discuss with Hamas's military commanders about the draft. But Haniyeh and Hamas in general have reiterated the same point, that they want a permanent ceasefire as part of this deal, and that until that is in the deal, they will reject it. This deal does not have the words permanent ceasefire. So how do you get over, or how do you convince them to go over that concern that they've had?
You know, Nick, we've been mediating between the two sides since 2006 when the United States asked us to open this channel of communication. And we've grown to understand the patterns of the negotiations that go through. Obviously, on both sides, you will hear a lot of statements. You'll hear grand positions over a lot of issues. The important thing is that the mediation in its entirety has always been key to the process itself. So we are listening to what we are getting from both sides. We believe that the language we have right now builds upon the proposals that came from both sides during the past couple of months.
But is Hamas still insisting that the draft have permanent ceasefire?
Usually what happens is that you get a yes, but. from both sides. So it depends on the size of that ask that is going to come back, but I'm quite sure that we are on the right track.
We heard from the other side, so to speak, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reiterating Israel's goals of, quote, eliminating Hamas and releasing the hostages. And as we heard earlier, he said the Israeli military will not withdraw from the Gaza Strip. That's what he said today. Does that prevent this deal from happening?
I think it's very important not to take everything said in front of cameras, at face value. I know we're speaking in front of cameras here, but there's a lot of propaganda, there's a lot of politicization of this, and trying to adhere to one's voter base rather than the reality of the situation.
I've asked you a version of this question before, but there are critics of yours who say you are both arsonist and firefighter. You are coming in to try and mediate today, but you are the arsonist in the sense that you're supporting Hamas. What's your response to that?
If you are going to accuse Qatar of supporting Hamas with the funding that was done through aid, then the same accusation would go to Israel itself, because all the funding that went into aid into Gaza was done in complete coordination with Israel. The money went through Israeli banks to make sure that we have enough calm in Gaza that we can work on mediation, and this is what we've been doing since 2006. But I can tell you that sadly, when we hear these words coming from Prime Minister Netanyahu, the only thing we can see there is a politicization of this crisis. He has made such statements about Qatar on the eve of, and he doubled down on these statements on the eve of the meeting in Paris when he is sending his chief of intelligence to meet with Qatar in the mediation. And while he is engaged in that mediation, if he is sincere about what he is saying in Qatar, can he answer the question of why he worked with Qatar on the funding of the aid programs in Gaza, why he's working now in the mediation, and why even on the 28th of September of last year, so just a week before the 7th of October, his government was engaged in mediation that Qatar was doing between Hamas and Israel. It is totally unacceptable, but sadly, we've grown accustomed to it.
Dr. Majid, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And that's PBS News Weekly. I'm Nick Schifrin. From all of us, thanks so much for watching.